So we're going to talk about the trip you had to Mexico. You talked to where you met the president of Mexico. So can you please discuss some of the things that you talked about with the president? What concerns were you presented, and was there any solutions?
Yeah, I recently took a trip to Mexico City with several of my colleagues, both on the Senate and the Democratic side. This doesn't happen in Congress. It's so divided. So to have a bipartisan, bicameral group go to Mexico City in itself is a story. What I thought was powerful, and I've met with all different types of heads of state. I met with Prime Minister Modi of India, former President Moon of South Korea. The list goes on and on. Visiting with the Mexican President Lopez Obrador, what was interesting is we had a 4 hour long discussion, and I thought it was fruitful. And it wasn't a one way discussion, it was a dialogue that went back and forth. A couple of things in particular that I mentioned was one, we have Americans that are missing in the in Mexico. We have Americans that are missing in Mexico, and I asked for his help in helping recover those Americans because right now there are many people that don't feel safe in Mexico, and he acknowledged that. The other thing I mentioned, sometimes the relations between U.S. and Mexico are as complicated as the border. Sometimes they're complicated as trade. Sometimes they're as complicated as water. So one of the things that I mentioned was if Mexico could release some water, in particular the lower valley area there in El Paso, is very constrained by water restrictions on the Mexican side.
How will Mexico work with the U.S. to address some of the border crises that we're having here, especially um, preparing for the end of Title 42?
Look, what a lot of times in these high level conversations, it's just this chicken dance where everyone talks about how wonderful job that they're doing. One of the things that I brought up when that was discussed, it started with the Mexican government saying, "Oh, the crisis is getting better, the numbers are going down, things are in a more orderly process." And honestly, I pushed back. I said that's the furthest thing from the truth. Look no further than last week at the Paso del Norte bridge, where there were 1,000, essentially mostly Venezuelans, that tried to rush the border. And so I kind of pushed back on that and said, no, it's not an orderly process. In my district in Ozona in West Texas, there was a grandmother and her granddaughter that were killed in a high-speed chase due to the smugglers. And so, in particular, one of the things that I asked for is what is happening is Mexico is granting tourist visas for people all over the world that are taking one way plane tickets from China, from the Middle East, from everywhere. And they have one intention, that's to enter the country illegally. Many times they're flying directly to Juarez, so they're no longer making this 22-day trek from the Darien Gap all the way through Mexico. They're flying straight to Juarez and they're coming over that way, or they're flying to Mexico City. So one of the things that I in particular asked for was help in curbing those tourist visas that ultimately we know they aren't here. They aren't visiting Mexico for tourism. That's how you get ahead of this crisis.
And what was his response when you asked him that?
He acknowledged. I think the government acknowledged that this is a real issue, and they kind of try to push and say there's a lot of complexities to this, and in some cases, there are countries that are complaining that Mexico's tourist process is too stringent. But to me, this is how the United States can ultimately put a little pressure on Mexico to stop those people from entering Mexico on tourist visas just to turn around and enter the United States illegally.
Okay. What are your thoughts about President Obrador's recent remarks about how fentanyl is largely a U.S. problem? It isn't produced or consumed in Mexico, and said the United States should use family values to fight drug addiction.
Look, fentanyl is killing people all over the world, and the United States is no different. One of the discussions during our conversation between the delegation and the president, President Obrador, Lopez Obrador, was the fact that he acknowledged that China is shipping many of these raw materials of fentanyl to the western coast of Mexico and the Manzanillo port, and then it's making way to the United States. And he also acknowledged that he needs to do a better job working with the Chinese government to prevent that. So I thought that in itself was promising. This is why it's important where lawmakers visit and you have this mutual respect, right? A strong Mexico is a strong United States. A strong United States is a strong Mexico. Prime example, El Paso and Juarez are one city. And so when one sneezes, the other one gets a cold. So we have to make sure that we're working through all of this together in a collaborative way.
Overall, do you feel the meeting was productive?
The meeting was very productive. I mean, the fact that like I said, I've had many of these high level conversations. They usually last about an hour. There's a lot of formalities. It's difficult to kind of get your point across. This was a 4 hour discussion, and it was very frank in many cases. And sometimes you had to ask a question a couple of different ways. Sometimes you didn't get the answers you necessarily wanted, but the fact that we're having that dialogue, I think it's important that the United States and Mexico continue to have this dialogue. I thought it was also very powerful that, my good friend Henry Cuellar, Democrat from Laredo, was there, Veronica Escobar, who I share El Paso County with, so my friend Maria Salazar from Florida, and bipartisan, bicameral delegation, very powerful in delivering the message.
And where do you go from here? What's next?
Yeah, what's next is we got to hold the Mexican government accountable for helping us find these Americans that are missing. In Congress, we have to do our part to find real, tangible solutions. Border security is one thing, immigration reform is another. We all should be for a safe border that prevents bad actors from coming into our country, fentanyl from coming into our country. And I believe in legal immigration, and we need to reform that. That starts here in Congress. Enough with the pointing fingers and placing blame. It's important that Congress work together in a bipartisan fashion to solve this.
All right, Tony, do you have anything else to add?
No, that's it, Dave. Thank you. Appreciate you covering it.
Well, thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, take care, brother.